With Seattle, it's an entirely different story where the coach came right out and said, just pure effectiveness isn't always the most important thing. When asked about this running back split, like, what?
Mike Macdonald doesn't seem to like Kenneth Walker. You've talked about some of the negative quotes on him. And you also have, I think, a trustworthiness for Zach Charbonnet, the pass blocker. I know that Brett Whitefield has brought this up, that Charbonnet's a better blocker. And I think that the coaching staff trusts him more along the goal line. They're showing it with the continued opportunities.
He's been awful at the goal line. And it's, we're not talking.
You're very angry about this. You're very, very angry. You've got a lot of animosity towards, shout out Mike Macdonald.
What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Which sleeper rookie wide receivers should fantasy managers be trading for in week 9 to help turbocharge their rosters for the rest of the season? That and much, much more. School of Scott Fantasy Football Podcast, Theo Gremminger and Scott Barrett every single week on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network and Fantasy Points YouTube. A lot to talk about, Scott, but we got to pour one out for our boy Cam Skattebo. Really, I feel like I've been talking about this every single day, and it just gets more and more depressing. Skattebo done for the season. Your New York Giants, within about a month, lose Malik Neighbors and Cam Skattebo on the season. And I'll remind you, as a Giants fan, you've also had to endure season-ending losses to players like Odell Beckham over the years, to Saquon Barkley. It just are the Giants fans cursed?
They were never going to make the playoffs this season anyway. They found their quarterback of the future, who's like really fun, and like Skattebo will be back at some point next year, and he's really good, and he has this great personality, and he's so fun to watch. But yeah, this is really depressing. This is just like a function of the game that we all love, and I'm not immune to it. I feel like I've run really bad with injuries the past few years, but I'm sure everyone feels that way. It's just a natural consequence of this grueling 17 game, very physical game of football that, we all love. And so it's your fantasy league is like a fist fight, is, who is the most resilient, who wants it the most. And that's kind of like, look at us, Theo, how many teams do we have that, we're riding Cam Skattebo, a top 10 fantasy running back that needed Cam Skattebo, that are, top 2 in the league, and then we lose him. We have to be gritty. We have to work the waiver wire. We have to pull something out of our butts. We were talking about spending big on Kareem Hunt in one of these leagues, and that's what you got to do. Listen, fantasy football is very much a war of attrition sometimes, some years with some teams. And, that's why we're here to help. That's why we do the School of Scott podcast every week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've said something. And first of all, like a shout out to you, like last 2 years, it's been very frustrating, but your process was excellent. Last year was Rashee Rice and Chris Godwin. Both of those guys lost for the season. This year, Malik Neighbors wasn't one that you were like, the guy was a first round pick, but he was part of your draft plan. Every time that we drafted collectively around the turn, anywhere like 9th pick on, we were sort of leaning towards Neighbors. And that looked like one that we were going to really, really nail. And then this year, again, with Skattebo, it's tough to take. And you got to think that one year you'll run completely injury-free and run completely pure, because the last 2 years after that, like 2026, the Exodia guys are all going to have play 17 games each. Just before we kind of move on, Jaxson Dart, your thoughts on him? Because, we talk about the loss of Neighbors. We talk about the loss of Skattebo. The personnel has now gotten worse around Dart. Are you worried a little bit? There's been some speculation that he's going to be more susceptible to an injury of his own, because if I'm Brian Daboll and I'm trying to sort of save my job, I'm going to call a ton of design runs for Jaxson Dart. That might be one of my weekly offensive game plans. And then from a different perspective, it's sort of like, I like Tyrone Tracy, but Tyrone Tracy's not going to give you this sort of top 10, top 8 type weekly performance at the running back spot. Wan'Dale Robinson has had some nice weeks, but he's certainly no Neighbors. Your thoughts on Dart sort of maintaining being fantasy viable on a weekly basis?
Not just fantasy viable, Theo. He's balling out, dude. It's 5 starts. He's scored over 18.5 fantasy points in all 5. He ranks top 5 in fantasy points per dropback, top 5 in fantasy points per start. He is awesome. And like, this is a really tough strength of schedule with like horrible supporting cast. Like Daniel Jones is an MVP front runner. And he sucked with this same supporting cast, the same offensive play caller, maybe even a better supporting cast because he had Malik Neighbors. Yeah, so he's awesome. I would, as a Giants fan, as someone who has a lot of pressure on his Exodia quarterback every year, I would love if they just shut him down. I would love if they gave him the Drake Maye treatment from last year, where it's like, hey, this is a lost year. We want a top 5 pick to get you a really good offensive lineman. You need to stop running. We need to protect you from yourself. This year doesn't matter. Next year, you can run. This year is about, learning the ropes, diagnosing coverages and all that. I think that's just not who he is. And I don't know that you can do that. But yeah, I would really prefer, as a Giants fan, a more long-term approach. Nothing foolish. Please do not get him hurt as well. And then just like a random note, you're going to think I'm crazy, Theo, but this is one of my all-time guys. Giants were working out Deontay Johnson today. If they sign Deontay Johnson, he is a player to look to add in like deep leagues, like the FFPC leagues, because the guy, whenever he's been on the field with a snap share above 70%, he somehow gets double digit targets. And like, I think he's, even a full year plus off from football. I trust him more than a Darius Slayton. Is he better than Wan'Dale Robinson? Yeah, I could see that. So be on the lookout for that. I mean, locker room poison, no doubt, but part of that there are pros and cons of that. He's probably chirping in Jaxson Dart's ear to get him the ball. I feel like if you sign Deontay and all the baggage that comes with it, don't be surprised if he gets real target volume.
Deontay Johnson, one last ride on Scott Barrett's bench. Scott Barrett recommending $1 bids for Deontay Johnson on your waiver wire run. Hey, it'll be interesting. Might as well bring him in. Giants were looking like sort of buyers at the trade deadline. I'm not sure if they're going to do that now. I also wonder if this is a chance for a sort of a reset and they end up hiring a new head coach this offseason. That's sort of being speculated now. Maybe Dable has a little bit less of a leash just because it's positivity seems to have worn down a little bit.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, like, I would have loved if they cut bait on him a lot earlier, but now you have real hope and optimism. You have your quarterback of the future. You have a Brian Dable who was hired because of his history, turning Josh Allen into Josh Allen. You had this, upset victory over the Chargers, over the Eagles. It would have been the Broncos. That's 3 playoff teams, if not for shout out to that Irish Rutgers alum kicker who couldn't hit an extra point to save his life. But you would have had that victory as well, despite no Malik Neighbors, despite running bad with injuries. And so I think you still have that optimism, and you don't want to screw things up, like look how good your quarterback looks. And he looks great. Now you're going to thrust a new coach on him. Maybe they don't mesh well. They have that great borderline, homoerotic rapport. I don't know if you saw the Connor Hughes tweet that went mega viral. But
I think that was really more of a homoerotic tweet from Connor Hughes.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. But they have a if you don't spin it that way, they have a really good rapport, a good relationship. Not homoerotic. Who said that?
Yeah, shout out to Connor Hughes. Will not be
he's a good beat.
He's a very, very good beat reporter, but I don't know.
That was a little sus. But and so you don't want to mess with that. The Giants, ownership, for better or worse, and like I think for the most part this is a good thing, is like the short leash GMs, coaches. it puts like the worst incentive on them. You really want GMs, especially GMs, but also coaches, to have a long-term orientation. You don't want them just win now at all costs, sacrificing the future to save their jobs. So I think Dable gets another year. I don't think he's going to get fired. But I also don't think he's the guy. Like, we just look at Daniel Jones and Indy, look at, this multi-year sample. But I don't think he does get fired.
Devil's advocate, Drake Maye, new offensive coordinator, new head coach, and he is top 3 scorer this year. So I buy into that. I think there's something to be being said for it's an impediment to progress for some of these quarterbacks when you change it up on them so quickly. But I don't know. Dable, we'll see how the second half of the year goes. I'm sort of tired of seeing Brian Dable, but we will see. If you want access to Scott's Everything Report, which is usually what we're talking about here on the School of Scott podcast, subscribe to Fantasy Points. You're also going to get access to my waiver wire column. You're going to get access to Graham Barfield's Start Sit. You're going to get access to all of our amazing articles, our amazing rankings, all of our amazing tools. All of our packages are discounted right now, and you can get an additional 15% off using the code Theo. The code Theo gets you 15% off any package over at fantasypoints.com right now. Scott, let's talk about it. In the Everything Report, it was an interesting one because you talked about some players that are sort of under the radar. Why should fantasy managers be considering trading for some of these rookies now? And we're not talking about the Teterow McMillan tier of rookies. We're talking about some players that maybe were undrafted in your league or very, very late draft picks. What are some historical trends that are saying to buy these players?
Yeah, so this was like a tweet I would put out every single year at around like the week 8 mark. It was just like, hey, reminder, rookies tend to see a massive uptick in volume and production in the second half of a season relative to the first. This is true of running backs as well as receivers. And I remember 2021 was like an all-time year for that. Amon-Ra St. Brown, over his last, 6 weeks of the season, just became the most valuable wide receiver in fantasy after just not doing anything. But it was also Elijah Moore that year, Jalen Waddle. And so yeah, that's just like a good heuristic to keep in mind. I will say it hasn't been as impactful in recent years as years past, and I think that's because nowadays there's a greater expectation on rookies to come in and immediately contribute in a way that this wasn't necessarily. Like Justin Jefferson was supposed to be a second stringer to start the year as rookie season. Maybe that was even the case his first 2 weeks. But nowadays it's like, no, you draft a wide receiver round 1, you're expecting an immediate full-time role, if not heavy target volume. And so, yeah, that's still the case. And so, our recommendation, Ryan Heath wrote this section of the article, but our recommendation together was really to highlight the more under the radar day 3 rookies. Tet McMillan obviously looks unbelievable. It's just this offense, Bryce Young holding him back. And then Travis Hunter, vibes of, Ryan and I recorded an impromptu School of Scott episode several weeks ago. And I scolded him again for, his love of Travis Hunter, but that looks really good right now. Really good positive buzz that the Jaguars are going to turn to him as the clear number 1 because things are not working with BTJ. But yeah, we gave a list of recommended later round wide receivers to target. In order, we went with Tez Johnson, Jaylin Noel, Luther Burden, Torrey Horton, your guy, Chimere DK. I don't know if there's one of those you want me to single out and start talking about.
Yeah, let's talk about Tez Johnson because he's a very interesting one. I have him rostered a ton of places. It's 4 straight weeks where he scored like 9.5 PPR points or more. That's coincided with Mike Evans now being on the injured reserve. And Tez is a player where I was down in Mobile with Brett Whitefield, John Hansen, Joe Dolan, Tom Brawley. And the first day at the Senior Bowl, Tez Johnson was just ripping it up. And we saw him have massive performances. Anybody who just wants to sort of like watch a Tez Johnson game, pop in the Oregon Penn State game from last year. He completely ripped them to shreds. He was a high level college producer. And then Scott, it fell to Tampa Bay, and it was like a Moneyball situation where they got him in the 7th round because he's slow and small, but the production was there, and he certainly doesn't move slow in real life football.
Yeah, he was reminding me of, a Kyron Williams of wide receivers, of a Bucky Irving of wide receivers, where, yeah, he was a round 7 pick. This is Bo Nix's adopted little brother. He, older FCS guy who transferred to be with Bo Nix at Oregon, very undersized, very unathletic, but the analytics, I mean, just 2 years ago, he ranked directly in between Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. and no one else in yards per route run among power conference receivers. So when you have a stat like that, like I know there were very screen heavy analytics profile, a bunch of warts I could pick into it. But like when you do that, like you have upside, and he's shown that these last few games. He's looked impressive to me. Perhaps most impressive of all, he only had that one screen target, this was like, he had so many of those in college and he was great at it. And he took that one screen 22 yards to the house, forcing 2 missed tackles in the process. This is one of the most screen heavy offenses in football. I'd really like to see more of that for Tez Johnson. But yeah, this is a great offense to be a wide receiver, a shifty slot wide receiver who's good on screens. And Baker Mayfield, this is what we talk about, is like he just balls out. Doesn't matter who's hurt, doesn't matter how many offensive linemen are down, how many starting wide receivers, he balls out, and he tends to take 1 or 2 guys with him. And so I don't see why that can't be Tez Johnson with Chris Godwin banged up, Mike Evans out for the year basically, Kate Otten not really a thing. So yeah, Tez I said was my favorite.
Yeah, I love Tez. I think Tez is one that's, he's been picked up in a lot of leagues, but I do think that if he's available in your league, or if somebody drops him during the bye week, I think he's sort of here to stay. And it's a franchise where we trust their decision-making process. You mentioned Bucky Irving. That was a day 3 guy for them. Kate Otten, day 3 guy for them. Jalen McMillan was a round 3 guy for them. They've hit on a number of these guys. And a big shout out to our Sunbelt Conference listeners. Tez Johnson played at Troy, not FCS, but he was a Sunbelt guy. So we got a big contingency of Sunbelt Conference listeners for School of Scott. We want to give you guys a shout out on that one. Scott, I'm a little surprised, though, you and Ryan Heath, 2 really, really smart guys, are not seeing the low-hanging fruit here that is Chim DK. Incredible speed, incredible opportunity where there's no other mouse to feed around him. Elik Iamaner, I realize he's been there for the course of the season, has been on the field a lot, but the production has been really hit or miss, and a lot more miss than hit. It seems to me like Chimere DK is the type of profile that could really hit for us in fantasy football. Again, elite speed, slot usage, lack of target competition, and a team that's going to be trailing for a ton of the game. And Chimere DK was nearly a day 2 pick. What was a early 4th round pick, went right around the same draft capital space as guys like Skattebo, guys like Bashal Tutin. Your thoughts on DK? I had him very highly ranked in my waiver wire column back-to-back weeks here.
Yeah, slot speedster. You really haven't seen too much of that, but T.Y. Hilton, throwback, was a fantasy superstar in that sort of role. I wasn't bullish. Only one player on the Titans is averaging more fantasy points per game than their kicker. It's like Tony Pollard by like 0.02. And yeah, it's just a dead offense that stinks. DK was not a player I was high on. My analytics profile was high on. I thought he got overdrafted. And then I saw the usage, and it was, or him playing on special teams. I'm like, all right, that makes sense. But as a receiver, he had 5 years in college, only had more than 2 touchdowns in one of those years. But But maybe I'm just a hater because yeah, like you said, the production's been there back to back weeks, hit 70 receiving yards in back to back games. I mean, like, has any Titans player had 70 yards in a game all year? So why not? Why not? Why can't there be a why can't Chimere DK be a thing? But yeah, I would for sure have him below Jaylin Noel and some of these other names.
Yeah, Noel's interesting. Talk about him because it's a player that I was high on. Brett was even higher on, and I know you liked in the draft process as well. Noel was a Senior Bowl just killer down there. Incredible strength. He had like 22 reps on the bench press. Great speed and a ton of college production. We've seen back-to-back weeks where he's impressed, and the yards per route run numbers are terrific. But the snaps, he definitely is not getting enough snaps here. Even with Nico Collins out, we saw Jaden Higgins north of 80% snap share. We saw Xavier Hutchinson out snapping Jaylin Noel. Your thoughts on Noel? It seems to me like he's interesting because there's not a crossover skill set with Nico Collins like we might have with Higgins. And Jaylin Noel he looks good. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, well, that's where me and Ryan were kind of debating when we went through these rankings, where it's like he looks really good. He's the only Texans receiver producing outside of Nico, and he's actually more efficient than Nico. He's averaging nearly 3 yards per route run. I think minus Nico, like no one's over like 0.69. But still, he's like splitting time with Braxton Berrios in a part-time role. Like I thought Braxton Berrios like retired to become a TikTok guy. And he's stealing routes from jail. It's so stupid. And I mean, this is the same problem with Luther Burden, who's third on the list. Is like the guy's killing it in yards per route run. He ranks top 5 among all players in yards per route run, yards per target over expectation. And he can't see the field over Olamide Zaccheaus. Like, what are we doing here? It's just so stupid. It's frustrating. And it's like, I think I understand blocking matters and all that, but I do think to some, like, what a receiver does when the ball isn't in his hands, but also like, getting open and generating yards is probably the most important thing. And it's just, I think these coaches can kind of overthink things and break like the most important, thing to know and do as an NFL decision maker, which is like, have your best players on the field as much as possible.
Yeah, a big shout out to Sigmund Bloom. He's always talking about rational coaching and how we can't always assume rational decision making in front offices, rational coaching. And I think with Houston, there's a lot of things wrong. If I'm coaching Houston, Jaylin Noel is getting a big expanded role moving forward. Make sure you check out Scott Barrett's Everything Report over at Fantasy Points. Make sure you check out Fantasy Points data. If you want access to the best analytics, the best tools, the best data anywhere, consider Fantasy Points data. Same code Theo gets you 15% off any Fantasy Points data package. Scott, let's talk about Bye-Mageddon. It's over. We have 4 teams on bye this week, 4 teams on bye next week, but the really, really crazy week is in the books. Of the teams that were on bye week last week, who's the player that you're most interested in? And take this any way you want. Usage, opportunity. If something was going well, is it going to continue going well? You mentioned Travis Hunter. Any other guys that you have your eye on here?
Yeah, it's absolutely Travis Hunter is like the hype we've heard this past week has been deafening. And we know Liam Cohen can scheme a guy up to great success. He did it with Chris Godwin last year, who ranked behind only Jamar Chase in fantasy points per game, but easily leading the league in screen targets per game. And then there's also, I think, for an FFPC tight end premium league, I think Terrence Ferguson's interesting as a stash, just in case he gets more work coming out of the bye. We talk about rookies getting more work in the second half of a season, but that's especially true immediately following a team's bye week. And then Torrey Horton too. I was talking to one of our best charters, one of the Fantasy Points data charters, who said, I wasn't very high on Torrey Horton, but he said, what he's seen on film, he reminds him of Antonio Brown. And, Cooper Kupp at this stage of his career certainly isn't reminding anyone of even Cooper Kupp from a few years ago. And so there's clear upside there. And that's something we've talked about with JSN, where like his production is insane. How he has basically like 50% of the team's passing yards, and how the utilization for him has been incredible. It's because he's running a really high number of horizontal routes, which are the money routes, a lot of condensed sets. Basically, what that means is there's not many wide receivers on the field, so that's lesser target competition. So your expected target per route run in any given route is high, and then it's a lot of under center play action and motion and these other efficiency hacks, where basically like if Cooper Kupp wasn't dust, Cooper Kupp would be like averaging like 18 plus fantasy points per game. And so Torrey Horton has that upside if they started, mixing him in more over Cooper Kupp in these two wide receiver sets. I don't think that's too likely, but that's something to monitor over the next several weeks. What about you, Theo? What were some of your hopes and dreams for these teams coming out of bye weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of the big hope for a couple of our shared teams would be that the Seattle backfield split maybe leans a little bit more to Kenneth Walker.
Yeah, this is what we just talked about, Theo, with these coaches, the assumption of rational coaching. And we just saw it with Rico Dowdle as well, where like at least the coach admitted it, where with Rico Dowdle, yet another week where Dowdle's yards per carry was, 3 times as good as Chuba Hubbard's. And Canales basically came out and he was like, all right, guys, here's what's going on. We love Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard has this amazing, infectious personality where he's a tone setter. He's sort of like the heart and soul of our offense. But yeah, Dowdle's just been so much better. And so like we didn't want to take those touches away from like our personal mascot. But at this point, it's just clear as day. Dowdle's the better running back and deserves more touches. I'm paraphrasing horrifically, but like that's how I read it. With Seattle, it's an entirely different story where the coach came right out and said, just pure effectiveness isn't always the most important thing when asked about this running back split. Like what? And then the next day, they also said, yeah, Kenneth Walker's foot is still an issue, by the way. So it's either, I don't think it's this. It could be Kenneth Walker. There was this great tweet where it's like, Kenneth Walker doesn't lose yards. He takes sacks, because he has some runs where he just loses like 7. But like you factor that in, you look at success rate, you look at EPA per run. He is running circles around Charbonnet, who is not good at football. I think he's clearly like dealing with a foot injury. He's not, they want to preserve him as much as possible, maybe for the playoffs. But yeah, they are willing to give half the carries to a guy who's going to generate a third as many yards on those carries. So like I've never heard a coach say this, that like, the fact that this guy is better isn't always the only thing that matters. But like that's where I'm not optimistic. But geez, yeah, I would love if Walker became the guy we drafted him to be, the guy, like he kind of his efficiency warrants, but we'll see.
At this point, if you're Kenneth Walker manager, you might even take a consistent 50-50 snap share, because it's some weeks it just does not even go in that direction. I will say, devil's advocate, Mike McDonald doesn't seem to like Kenneth Walker. You've talked about like some of the negative quotes on him, and you also have, I think, a trustworthiness for Zach Charbonnet, the pass blocker. I know that Brett Whitefield has brought this up, that Charbonnet is a better blocker, and I think that the coaching staff trusts him more along the goal line. They're showing it with the continued opportunities.
He's been awful at the goal line, and it's we're not talking. I'm so angry about this.
You're very angry about this. You're very, very angry. You got a lot of animosity towards, shout out Mike McDonald. The other player that I think is tilting and will get you angry, maybe angrier, is we've seen what peak Trey McBride can look like with Jacoby Brissett. Now we're going to have a return of Kyler Murray. Trey McBride leads all tight ends in targets. This is a guy who put up a massive scoreline in week 7. The last time we saw Trey McBride, it was 10 catches, 74 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 13 targets. Now he gets back Kyler Murray. What are your expectations here, Scott?
Yeah, a little bit less. I think it was a real question to ask if, the offense is better with Jacoby Brissett. If Jacoby Brissett's an upgrade over Kyler Murray, he can, allow the offense to do things more differently, be a little bit more modern with more under center dropbacks. And it's also just like a cheat code because Brissett has always targeted tight ends at the highest rate in the league. So, yeah, I think this is a downgrade for Trey McBride. McBride was, crushing worlds that with Brissett, and now he'll just go back to being Trey McBride of last year, who was still, awesome and a top 3 fantasy tight end.
He goes from a PPR merchant who also gets Rob Gronkowski like touchdown scoring to just sort of a really, really good PPR merchant. Very disappointing. A nice professional segue, though, to our tight end discussion. Let's talk about some Tucker Kraft. And it's a player that we were drafting a good deal of throughout the process in like FFPC leagues. We were taking him in round 8. I think we took him in round 7 once when there was a big tight end run. Tucker Kraft is currently about 10th in tight end targets. I believe he's 9th or 10th in total targets. And he is first in fantasy points. Incredible yak production, incredible efficiency. Where are you at on Tucker Kraft rest of season? He's really, really doing well for us in fantasy.
Yeah, so I in the everything report, I wrote a number of words talking about my love of Tucker Kraft, and people who are familiar with me know I've been one of George Kittle's greatest champions over the years, and I called, we have baby Gronk on TikTok, but Kraft is like baby Kittle. He is the best yak player in football, better than prime George Kittle, better than prime Deebo Samuel. Freakish hyper efficiency last year, demanded more targets, and more targets tend to come after an extremely hyper efficient season, and they have come. It's his by first read target share, he's jumped from 11.7%, which ranked 28th, to 21.6%, which ranks 7th at the position. But Ryan Heath, digging deeper, had this amazing poll. If you look at the 4 games he wasn't on the injury report, he's averaging a 24% target share that ranks second best, 85 yards per game that ranks best, 21.1 fantasy points per game. And then even if that's not true, even if that's just, reaching, he's still seen 10 and 9 targets the last 2 weeks. Across his previous 39 games, he cleared 7 targets only once. I don't really trust Matt LaFleur, but I do trust Kraft as a talent. I was saying last year, I thought he was a top 5 tight end in football. I just didn't know if he could be a top 5 tight end in fantasy without the target volume. But yeah, he deserves that target volume. And right now you have him leading the position in fantasy points per game. I think he's a top 6 tight end moving forward. I think he has massive league winning potential if this sort of usage sticks, and I think it should.
Yeah, he's 1 target off of the lead for Green Bay. One of the easiest ways to find tight end production, we talk about this in a lot of our offseason School of Scots. We had Andrew Cooper on, who's going to be joining me on Fantasy Football Daily. We had Max Toscano on. We went sort of very, very deep into tight end conversations. And one of the easiest ways to find that production is just identifying a top 2 target on the offense. Tucker Kraft is checking that box off. I think with the ascension of Christian Watson, we'll talk about him shortly, I think that there's a chance that it gets even more cluttered in terms of the target tree among the wide receivers there. So I think this is Tucker Kraft wheels up season. I think he's going to do very well. I would say top 3 rest of the season. I might be a little bit higher than you. And I think from a dynasty perspective, he's a top 4 tight end in dynasty, top 3 or 4 in redraft. He just looks fantastic. And what's interesting about him is coming out of a small school, the learning curve was maybe a little bit slower. So he's in year 3, but again, coming from the FCS level, I think that's really interesting, kind of a take on him. I discussed that on a couple shows this week. The other player who we've got to talk about, and we were really high on this guy a couple of times, Oronde Gadsden, We talked about how you must have him on your fantasy rosters. We have him on a bunch of teams now. Gadsden looks incredible. Day 3 unicorn. Is he starting to be in that category? Is he like a top 5 tight end in Dynasty and top 5 rest of the season type play? I mean, he looks just unbelievable, Scott. They were double teaming Oronde Gadsden last week, which freed up Ladd McConkey for a big week. He's unlocking this entire offense. Justin Herbert now is back in our good graces and balling out after sort of a slow slug after a really red hot start. Everything's wheels up about this passing game, and Gadsden's a major part of it.
Yeah, well, Justin Herbert got Joe Alt back. I think that's massive. And yeah, it looks like he has the best receiving core in football. It looks like Gadsden might be the best, if not the second best receiver on the team. He looks incredible. Looks like Darren Waller 2.0. Yeah, in the first half of last week's game, he had a team high 77 yards and a touchdown. Ladd McConkey also had 77 yards and a touchdown. But on that touchdown that McConkey scored, Gadsden was getting double teamed. Like you don't double team a guy unless he's damn good. And he looked unstoppable to start that game. So I get why they did that. Averages over 100 yards over his last 3 games. I think he's a league winner. I think he's, absolutely a top 6 dynasty tight end. If not higher. Yeah.
Fannin or Gadsden in dynasty?
Oh, absolutely. Gadsden. Easy by a mile.
Well, that was the one question. And not to get too dynasty-ish, if anybody wants to listen to Dynasty, shameless plug, subscribe to my Dynasty show, Dynasty Life. But Fannin versus Gadsden, you mentioned the receiving core. In 2026, maybe Fannin is the leading target on Cleveland, whereas Gadsden's going to compete for targets with really good players.
I don't think we could see Fannin look as good as Like this is just special on another level. Darren Waller 2.0 is what I said, and Tucker Kraft is baby Kittle, George Kittle reincarnated. And that's just like special. Whereas Fannin, I don't know, he had a sick, maybe he had a sick analytics profile, but I don't know that he has Waller, Kittle, and the range of outcomes.
Gadsden's a unicorn, and the one thing with Fannin is we're never going to get that straight line speed. It's always sort of a little. That's maybe the one little thing that I would look to change on Fannin. I think they're both great dynasty assets. Redraft wise, it's clearly Gadsden. Looks like a unicorn. Let's keep the tight end conversation going. Worried at all about your guy Jake Ferguson? We finally have seen sort of what could go bad here. Your thoughts here?
So he just had a 2.9% target share. That was his lowest in any game since he was a backup tight end
since forever.
With Dak Prescott under center. And so like on one hand, I think it makes sense to like get him less target volume following the George Pickens ascension to alpha status and with CeeDee Lamb back. But also like this happens, it just volatility is inherent to the position, and he still leads all tight ends and receptions by a lot. So I wouldn't overreact to it, but it is something I'm going to monitor. If it happens again next week, then yeah, this is really bad for a player who's all of his fantasy value just comes from that being a PPR merchant in the most derogatory sense of there's no pretenses that I think he's like some special talent. He's not getting open. His ass isn't good. He just gets these dump offs where like I would be open. He just runs 3 yards is open, check down safety valve, and racks up the PPRs. And so if you take that away, that's really not good. But I don't think that does go away. I think this is kind of who Dak is, what he likes to do with the ball. And so I kind of think it was just like an off week for him. I think he's going to be very scheme sensitive, better against too high and zone. And maybe this was a more man heavy matchup, but just something to monitor for sure at the very least.
The third, right now, Jake Ferguson, number 1 in receptions at the tight end position. Trey McBride, number 2. Number 3 is now Kyle Pitts. Are Kyle Pitts back-to-back strong weeks? Are we starting to get a little bit excited about Kyle Pitts? Is this a little bit of a mirage? Of course, Drake London missed last week, but we have 16 catches from Kyle Pitts in the last 2 weeks played.
Yeah, he ranks top 4 in target share. He ranks top 4 in XFP per game. Um, he hit a 19% target share only twice all of last year. He hit that in 5 of 7 games. It's just like an entirely different role, and it's one we have to buy into. I mean, he's still just like what, a low end tight end 1, but yeah, that's a lot better than things were last year. I know we all have PTSD, but yeah, he's fantasy viable. I don't think we're talking about like an Oronde Gadsden, Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren type ceiling here, but he's a rosterable, startable player in fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you sort of nailed it. He's a startable tight end, and I think he's got an expected weekly floor moving forward. It's not a league winner, but it's a player who can definitely help you if you have him on your roster, and potentially a player you want to trade for if you're in dire straits at the tight end position. The Greatest Show on Turf Part 2 just continues to roll. The Indianapolis Colts, we're not even going to talk about Jonathan Taylor this show because we talk about him literally every single week. Let's talk about Daniel Jones, the quarterback. Daniel Jones, another very, very strong game from him, looking completely comfortable in this scheme under this coaching staff. Is Daniel Jones potentially a player that fantasy managers should be buying at this point in the season for a big-time stretch run heading into the fantasy playoffs?
Yeah. So Hilo was comping the Colts to last year's Eagles, just like we've been comping this year's Cowboys to last year's Bengals. And I thought that worked really well. Jonathan Taylor is this year's Saquon Barkley. He's on pace for nearly 2,300 yards from scrimmage and 30 touchdowns. Daniel Jones, this year's Jalen Hurts, where he's playing really well. He ranks 3rd in fantasy points per dropback. It's just he's not being pushed. He can just fully take his foot off the gas in the second half. And you are seeing that. Daniel Jones leads the league in passing yards per game in the first half by a significant margin. And then in the second half, he just ranks 26th in passing yards per game. And so he's sort of held back by how good and how efficient this offense is. And it's insanely efficient. This is the best points per drive average of any offense through the first 9 weeks of the season since like the Kurt Warner Rams. The one note I had though is it is possible for this to change. It is possible the Colts, might just decide to keep their foot on the gas until very late in the games. That's what Andy Reid's Chiefs have always done. That's what Dan Campbell's Lions have always done. The Bills under Dorsey used to do that. And you saw that last week. They had a 15.1% pass rate over expectation. That was one of the top 5 highest marks of any team in any game this year. Daniel Jones was chucking touchdown passes up 30 points in the fourth quarter. And so, yeah, I think this is something to watch. This is an amazing matchup against the Steelers, who are just hemorrhaging fantasy points everywhere. And so I'm interested to see what they do. I'm interested to see, how aggressive they are in terms of play calling and pass rate if this game isn't competitive. Because there's a ton of fantasy upside if they wanted to be as aggressive as Dan Campbell's Lions instead of as unaggressive as last year's Eagles.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Shout out to Hilo. Shout out to Mark Garcia on that one. Really, really sharp guy. I love that parallel, and that's one I haven't really considered. I don't know. It feels like we're going to learn a lot more about them over the next 3 weeks. That Kansas City matchup is just like such a made-for-TV type moment. Kansas City playing like they're going to win the Super Bowl. Indianapolis playing like they're going for a number 1 seed. I can't wait for that game. I think Daniel Jones, there's always going to be fantasy managers who are thinking that it's the floor is going to fall out from under Daniel Jones. I've seen Daniel Jones in years past. This can't be real. but the offensive ecosystem in Indianapolis is unbelievable. I believe this is going to end up being a really big season for Daniel Jones, fully buying into it. One quarterback who had a huge week 8 performance, Jordan Love had his best game of the season, hit season highs in multiple categories, and he had 3 touchdown passes. This has also sort of coincided with Josh Jacobs being, Josh Jacobs looks like he's banged up. I know that we had Josh Jacobs almost missing a couple of weeks back with a calf injury. Just doesn't look like himself. Little more pass happy from Green Bay. It also coincided with the return of Christian Watson. Is this something that we should be monitoring with Jordan Love? Was this a one-off situation, or is this a sign of more things to come?
Yeah, it's something to monitor. Jordan Love, very efficient. He's ranked exactly 7th in fantasy points per dropback in each of the last 3 years. It's just this has been since the Josh Jacobs breakout at about the halfway mark last year. This has been the most run-heavy offense in football, including inside the red zone, where points matter most. But when they take the training wheels off and let Jordan Love chuck it, he's great for fantasy. Over the last 2 seasons, he averages 22.7 fantasy points per game when attempting 30 or more passes. It's more than Baker Mayfield, more than Patrick Mahomes, more than Jalen Hurts. It's just like a very infrequent event. And so, like, does this stick? Probably not. This is like their highest P row in over a year. Like you said, Jacobs dealing with a calf injury. The Steelers are also the biggest pass funnel in football. So I personally don't trust it, but there is a ton of upside if this sticks. And yeah, shout out to Christian Watson. I don't know what it is, but I've been telling Ryan Heath all off season that I just have this gut feeling Christian Watson's going to ball out. And part of it is just like, because it doesn't make any sense that like this would be the breakout year, 6 months removed from ACL surgery. But I feel like that's exactly why it makes the most sense, is because it doesn't make any sense. And that's just how it works with, some of these players we love. Like this is Ryan's Elijah Moore. Yeah, I just think he's a really talented player. I thought he looked really good last week. And so he's another player to monitor and keep an eye on.
All right, we're going to give you one more chance. Quarterback question. Are you ready to capitulate to Patrick Mahomes being the QB1 rest of the season? And shout out to Brett Whitefield, who I'm sure is going to listen to this as well. I want to get his thoughts on that one too. Are we ready for it, Scott? Another 3 touchdown performance from Patrick Mahomes. And just a quick reminder of Mahomes. Mahomes now leads all quarterbacks in passing touchdowns, passing yardage, and he's 2nd in rushing yards.
Yeah. I mean, it's 3 straight games with exactly 3 passing touchdowns. More than that, he's averaging 30 rushing yards per game his last 3 games. That was a big concern for me, whether that the rushing production would stick. And he's doing it in blowout victories the last 2 weeks. What is it, like the 60-7 is the combined scores? So yeah, I mean, he has to be one of the leading candidates. Although I'm still going to give it to Lamar Jackson. I think he comes back Thursday night and wrecks fantasy leagues from there on.
Yeah, you're Lamar Jackson back Thursday against Miami. That should be a really, really fun one. Let's talk about the running back trade window. There's a lack of clarity with Omari and Hampton coming back from injury. We talked about Oronde Gadsden, and Oronde Gadsden's incredible performance, Ladd McConkey's great performance, sort of was the talk of fantasy, but Kimani Vidal continues to produce, and his usage looks great. You mentioned Rico Dowdle earlier in the show. Kimani Vidal and Rico Dowdle would sort of look to me like exactly the kind of players that fantasy managers should be looking to trade for, whether it's redraft or even win now dynasty teams. Your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't really trust Kimani Vidal too much, although he's going to, long term, I think I think Omarion Hampton, once he comes back, and like you said, it is weird. We're not really getting anything tangible on him. He should just come out and crush. But certainly this week against the Titans, Kimani Vidal, I think it's going to be another 100 plus yards and a touchdown this week.
Yeah, definitely Kimani Vidal's interesting. Just it's sort of the longevity. The reason I say to trade for him is I think some managers are anticipating Hampton coming back soon, where I'm not so sure about that one. Dowdle's just a low-hanging fruit one. Let's talk about Derrick Henry. Scott, I told you in the pre-show, we haven't gotten the Scott Barrett annual banger tweet where you talk about Derrick Henry, how every month that he goes up in terms of rushing yardage and production. Are we going to end up with a really big November from Derrick Henry? I think it's trending in that direction. Back-to-back weeks where the volume's been exceptional. Now he gets back his quarterback, Lamar Jackson. Schedule looks good. Your thoughts on the big dog?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on how awful this defense is. Like that's part of my love for Lamar Jackson is, the defense a little bit healthier now, but to start off the year, it was looking like one of the worst defenses in football. And if it's that bad, then I could see Derrick Henry easily getting scripted out of games. And sure, he'll be productive because he's one of the best runners in NFL history. But he's also one of the most game script sensitive players in fantasy history. So volatility. And like I said, that's why I like Lamar Jackson is if this defense is bad, they're going to need him to be Superman. And when Lamar Jackson is asked to be Superman, he delivers and he puts up an insane amount of fantasy points. But yeah, with Lamar Jackson back, game script should be better. We've seen without Lamar, Henry get his best volume games of the season, despite, bad game script against the Rams. Hopefully that sticks. Does that stick? But yeah, I feel a little bit more comfortable with Lamar than Henry, I'd say.
And on Thursday evening, we're going to see Derrick Henry going up against Devon Achane. Your thoughts on Achane? It continues to produce, but we did see Miami getting multiple running backs involved. Any takes on this? Potentially rest of the season, Devon Achane outlook. The guy's just playing unbelievable fantasy football.
Yeah, I'm really not too worried about it just because he actually hit a season high in XFP last week. 18 carries, 7 targets. He's sort of like Miami's Christian McCaffrey, where he's getting like a wide receiver 1 level of target share, and he is producing on the ground. He's hit at least 5 yards per carry in 4 of his last 6 games. I feel really good about Achane. And like you said, there were rumors that Seattle was going to trade for Achane. Imagine Achane in the Clint Kubiak scheme. That's game over.
Yeah, imagine Achane as a number of teams. I mean, like that's the one thing we talked about last week with Achane, and I encourage everybody to go back and listen. A lot of our episodes are really evergreen, and we try to take a big season perspective as opposed to just the week. But it's like Achane potentially could go to an offense that's better, potentially go play against a quarterback that's better, or play next to a quarterback that's better. And just so many things could improve for him. The pass catching ability is just insane. Interesting, like Chris Wecht, I saw him with a shout out to Chris Wecht, does a tremendous job at fantasy points, but I think he was a little bit more worried about this situation. Good to hear that you are not when it's regarding just what Miami's going to do. But I think Achane getting traded could end up being just the biggest benefit to him than sort of the train wreck that's currently going on in Miami. How he's been able to score sort of despite his situation. Like you said, it's Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey had some weird years in Carolina in terms of the team around him. You could end up seeing a McCaffrey into San Francisco-like explosion from Achane. So I'm not worried about him at all. That would certainly be a great thing for us to talk about. And next week, we're going to get a chance to talk about these sort of potential trades that might have actually gone through, Scott. Really excited about that one. Talk about James Cook. I had a chance to go on with our friend, Mike Shope. I know you go on that show a lot as well. Big shout out to Mike. Mike does a tremendous job, WGR in Buffalo, and also he does ship chasing and ADP chasing over at the Ship Chasing guys. But we talked about James Cook. Mike and the Bulldog were both saying look for a big one from James Cook coming out of the bye week. And both of them anticipated that they were going to be using James Cook as a receiver more out of the backfield. I thought that's interesting because those guys are so locked in with the organization in Buffalo. We didn't see that, but we saw James Cook just go nuts as a runner. Your thoughts on what you saw from Buffalo, an absolute beatdown against Carolina?
Yeah, 0 catches in the month of October for James Cook. His usage and volume really has come down, but he does this thing where he just freaking rips off insane 80-yard runs every 12 carries. It feels like the dude is incredible. And this is just one of those guys that makes me pull my hair out because, I'll preach regression to the mean, fantasy points tends to follow XFP and whatnot, but there have been these guys over the years who just really just made me look like an idiot. Nick Chubb early in his career, Derrick Henry early in his career. And James Cook is just the next one in line where it's like a great offense and it's a great player. It's like with rare gifts and rare talents. And so, yeah, he's a, I don't know, top 7 fantasy running back, despite, probably going to finish with like RB20 levels of XFP per game.
Yeah, James Cook and the Bills against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. Definitely a big game that we have circled for this Sunday. Always sort of appointment viewing. What's your lean on?
Night?
No, it's Sunday at 4:30 Eastern time.
Jeez.
What's your lean in that one? KC at Buffalo. I'm rolling Chiefs, man. I think I'm going with the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Chiefs look like they're getting it done.
Dude,
so
Drake Maye stole all of Josh Allen's aura.
Yeah. Drake Maye is definitely an aura thief for sure. Even has Stephon Diggs on there. So yeah, man, Drake Maye getting it done. We have that rematch down the line as well. That'll be a big game that we've got our eyes on. Let's talk about the wide receiver dynamics. You talked about Christian Watson. That's a really fun one. I wrote about him in my waiver wire article. You can read over at fantasypoints.com. We talked about last week DeVonta Smith potentially overtaking AJ Brown as the wide receiver 1 in Philadelphia. We don't really have any additional usage to talk about in that regard because AJ Brown missed the game. DeVonta Smith again with a 45% target share. Jalen Hurts 4 passing touchdowns. And of course, Saquon Barkley went absolutely nuts. Philly's on their bye week. Let's talk about another wide receiver room to keep an eye on. Troy Franklin, huge week in week 8. The Troy Franklin versus Courtland Sutton dynamics for the rest of the season. At the very least, does Troy Franklin sort of limit the ceiling outlook for Sutton rest of season? And could it be worse than that? Could Franklin actually be in sort of a 1A, 1B?
Yeah, well, it's certainly not good for Sutton. I was praising Sutton just a few weeks ago for his, really strong consistency. Heading into week 6, the stat was he hit double-digit fantasy points in 14 of 15 games, averaged 8.3 targets, 17.3 fantasy points per game. Those are easy top 12 numbers. Over the last 3 games, though, Troy Franklin has had more targets in each of those games. I think it's in 6 of 8 games this year. Franklin has out-targeted Sutton. Keep in mind, last year, over Sutton's last 10 games, he led the team in targets in every single one. 25.1% target share last year over that span. But this year, since week 4, Franklin and Sutton are both at 17.9%. So that's just a really big drop off. And yeah, it's not good for Sutton. He's a player I'm dropping down to the, I don't know, low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 range. Franklin, do we trust this? I don't know. I'll just say he's been on my radar for a while as a positive regression candidate. Leads the league in uncatchable air yards. Since week 2, he ranks 20th in XFP per game. That's ahead of names like AJ Brown, Emeka Egbuka, Tet McMillan, and even Sutton. And the fantasy points just weren't there. And a lot of that was just Bo Nix's inaccuracy. And yeah, so he had this big game. That's great. Franklin was a player I was I was really high on. The Broncos were really high on. It seemed like no one else was actually that high on, but he played with Bo Nix at Oregon. Was really productive, 106 yards per game his final season. I don't know how much I trust it again. Like Bo Nix has just not played well this year, and you're not going to face the Cowboys every week, but it is something to keep an eye on because the volume has been so strong. So yeah, downgrade Sutton, upgrade Franklin to, I don't know, mid-range wide receiver 4 levels.
Yeah, I think that's about right. Let's stay with Denver. RJ Harvey, the big game here, ran absolutely pure on touchdown scoring. Your thoughts on Harvey? Is this real? Is this the start of something big? Was this just a 1-week game script? Your thoughts here on just how we should value RJ Harvey, and should he be in fantasy lineups this week, Scott?
Yeah, Harvey player I was extremely high on. I am not bullish on Harvey this week long term. Um, in close games, they just like totally move away from him. And yeah, he's had some production in these blowout victories against awful defenses, Cincinnati, Dallas, and it feels like a make a wish thing. You know, it's like let's bolster Harvey's confidence here. But the bottom line is like J.K. Dobbins is to me clearly the RB1, and that's really especially the case when these games are close and competitive. So yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but for a player I loved, was very bullish on, I'm not too excited about him, and I just don't see J.K. Dobbins going away without injury, and because that's the case, like I don't see much upside for him. So yeah, I mean it's a step in the right direction. At least he was productive, unlike TreVeyon Henderson for all of the year minus this week, but yeah, not too bullish.
Okay, you got to get a little more bullish. The guy had 3 touchdowns. The guy had 24 PPR points. I know that they're scoring
Yeah,
big numbers against
touches.
Dallas. That's
How many
fine.
did J.K. Dobbins have?
But this is one where I think this sort of efficiency is going to warrant more touches. Scott, we'll go with an over/under fantasy points prediction for RJ Harvey against Houston. You can set the number. We'll make a little bet here.
What Harvey?
I'm going to say over. No, just as a fantasy scorer, I'm going to say over 13.5 points scored this week. RJ Harvey, I'm on the over.
Under, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Under.
There we go. To be continued here.
What happens to the loser here? What's the?
We're gonna have to figure it out. Audience, make some suggestions in the YouTube comments about what should our bets be. We only have one bet right now. We were gonna make a bunch of bets. Next year we have to get these bets going. I think we make probably more arguments and bets in just Discord discussions than we do actually on this show. But next year we're gonna have to. This is our first one. RJ Harvey. I'll take over 13.5 points. I could have gone with like 11.5 here, but I'm going bold here. I'm saying 13.5.
I'll give you 11.5. I'll give you 11.
Okay, you're good. No, I don't need it. I'm taking 13.5. I'm going super bullish here. Okay. And let's talk about TreVeyon Henderson. I mean, I understand the TreVeyon Henderson hate, but he ran very well against Cleveland. 10 carries for 75 yards. Only 34 rushing yards for Ramondre Stevenson. The touches, of course, 15-10 in favor of Mondre. Could this be the start of something with TreVeyon Henderson?
Yeah, I mean, I liked how they used him too. Pitches on the outside, runs he really excelled at in college that you haven't seen from him through the first 7 games this season. Vision has been an issue, and that's a little less important on the runs he was getting last week. But yeah, also, I mean, we're talking about 10 carries here and a player who averages like 20 yards per game and has otherwise sucked and like isn't seeing the ball even when both running backs in front of him fumble. So yeah, step in the right direction for ... a bust, like a horrible draft pick. Yeah, I'm not getting carried away, but yeah, sure, step in the right direction.
Okay, we'll take it. That's the nicest thing you've said about TreVeyon Henderson in weeks. The haters are out in full force on Emeka Egbuka. The last 3 so Emeka Egbuka, just a little bit of a timeline here. Egbuka was banged up, comes back and plays, and maybe he's still banged up, but the efficiency has not been there like we've seen. We've seen 21 targets the last 2 weeks, but we've now seen 3 straight weeks where he's had sub 10 points scored. The Tampa Bay gets to their bye week this week. I think it's an important one for Emeka Egbuka, but I'm seeing a lot of haters on X coming out, sort of victory lapping, like I told you so. You should have sold high on Egbuka. I'm not there. Where are you at on Egbuka?
No, I feel good about Egbuka. Yeah, he picked up a hamstring injury a few weeks ago. Like, probably shouldn't have even played against the Lions, and then still not 100%. And the bye week's going to help him out. But part of the haters attacking Egbuka was the production. Although there wasn't the volume to come with it, and at least you could say 12 targets 2 weeks ago, 9 targets last week. So at least the volume's been there. And yeah, you could say he was due for a regression anyway. So now the regression's here, but you're still left with a player who, what was it, his first 5 weeks prior to injury was a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy points per game. And like, setups don't get much better than being the Baker Mayfield wide receiver 1. Last year, Chris Godwin, only Jamar Chase averaged more fantasy points per game than Chris Godwin. Godwin goes down in weeks without Godwin. Only Jamar Chase averaged more fantasy points per game than Mike Evans. And then Mike Evans goes down. Cade freaking Otton, who's done nothing else his entire career, is averaging 21 plus fantasy points per game over a 3 or 4 week stretch. So yeah, if Cade Otton could do it, I don't see why a less than 100% Egbuka can't put up crazy numbers. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think that's what we're going to see. And so, yeah, I remain bullish on Emeka Egbuka.
Yeah, I do as well. And a lot of times we see peaks and valleys with some of these rookies, whether they're banged up. Sometimes things are not going their way. But Egbuka profiles like a guy who's going to have a really, really strong second half of the year. Scott, gotta end it with this one. There's going to be a little bit of speculation here on Breece Hall potentially playing his last game as a New York Jet. It's very, very, I would put it at maybe 20% chance that they move him, but I do think the calls are going to be coming. Kansas City just lost Isaiah Pacheco for the season. Your thoughts on Breece Hall's huge performance in week 8, 3 fourth quarter touchdowns, including a passing touchdown, and just how sick would Breece Hall be on some of these other teams that might get traded to if a trade does go down?
Yeah, we were talking about the Chiefs, and it's like, yeah, top 7 fantasy running back on the, like, that's so game over. And like, yeah, he reminds me a lot of James Cook, where it's he leads the league in explosive run rate, like significantly more than James Cook, which shocked me. But he's a great pass catcher as well, where what was it? He had back-to-back seasons with 200 plus carries and 75 plus targets. You look at like the most recent running backs to do it, it's like Matt Forte and Le'Veon Bell. And so massive fantasy potential. It's just, he's been stuck on this deader than dirt Jets offense for Zach Wilson quarterbacking and whatnot. So yeah, let's get this guy on a competent offense, and then it's game over.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a wild trade deadline. I got a feeling. I don't know if that's necessarily going to lend itself to fantasy football, but we're already starting to see a lot of like smaller trades go down. I think it's going to be a more active than usual deadline. We love that when we're doing fantasy football content for sure. Scott, what do you have going on rest of the week?
Yeah, I shifted to DFS talk. What about you?
Yeah, man, I'm going to be in the DFS streets. I'm going to be hitting you up with a couple of DFS recommendations. You know, we got a fun DFS sweat last week again. Cam Skattebo's loss really hurt me in DFS. But man, you know, Cam Skattebo just killing people. Yeah, I've got Andrew Cooper coming on Fantasy Football Daily.
Nice. Love Cooper.
Yeah, Coop's a great guest. I'm going to record a Dynasty Life start sit with Graham Barfield. We're grinding through, man. Waiver wire is up at fantasypoints.com.
I can't believe it.
What's that?
I can't believe it's week 9 already.
Week 9. We are less than 60 days away from the start of Fantasy Championship Week, Christmas Day to some of you people. And that's going to be awesome. It's going to be fantastic. This is the stretch run No better place to get your fantasy advice than fantasypoints.com. If you're listening to School of Scott on the podcast feed, do us a favor and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're the fastest growing fantasy football YouTube channel for a reason. We're putting out videos that can help you win a lot. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the School of Scott podcast feed. Make sure you check out all of Scott's awesome DFS stuff. And I'll give a shout out. We're giving away more free DFS content through our YouTube channel than pretty much any other site going that's actionable and awesome. Highly recommend our DFS content on Fantasy Points YouTube. Stick with us here, everything fantasy-wise at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.